Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. On today's episode, you'll hear from my guest about her two major accidents and what she learnt from those and how those have affected her life moving forward. You'll hear about her book called Naturally Successful and the main lessons that she's taken from being a leadership coach for over 25 years. You'll also hear about her insights into nature and what it means to have a good connection to nature and how we can use those things in our daily lives. If you want episodes like this straight to your inbox, please click the link below and subscribe to the Graduate Theory newsletter to get episodes like this and my insights every single week. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. My guest today is a leadership expert with over 25 years of experience. She was born in Germany and moved with her family to Sydney in 2004. She's passionate about the environment. My guest has overcome extraordinary adversity in relearning how to walk twice, helping leaders better manage their energy, enabling them to develop greater influence and impact. Please welcome Ingrid Messner. Welcome, Ingrid.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jess.
Not a problem. I'm so excited to chat today. I want to ask, this is kind of the elephant in the room for me, this whole experience, you've relearnt to walk twice. Once is a massive process to go through, but I really want to speak about this, and perhaps you can tell the story of how these situations unfolded and then even what the learning or takeaways from those things are.
Yeah. So when you learn to walk as a child, it seems to be very easy. You fall over and you try again and you don't think twice and you don't remember anything about that. And then as an adult in 2017, I went on a bushwalk during an evening in Sydney and broke my leg. It's not very spectacular how I broke it. I just tripped on the track and fell very badly. So that in itself also would not have been too bad. But if you know a little bit about anatomy, it's in your knee. There's a part called the tibia plateau, which carries all your weight. And that part of my bone was literally shattered. So that meant there was no way I could get out of there. So the group I went with had to call the emergency services, and it was a bit of a rescue because it's actually, even though it's in Sydney, it's quite remote. So I had the full rescue with ambulance, fire brigade, water police, and all of that. And it was interesting to observe what happened afterwards, because the moment you enter the healthcare system, you become a part of it, and you really have to be careful that you still sort of take control and charge of your own healing and your own recovery, because there will be so many people telling you what's best for you, and they only see it from their quite narrow point of view. So, for example, I had to have surgery. So the surgeon, obviously, he did a great job and then said, I'll go and see this physio, which I was lucky was a physio that really understood what it means when you want to go back to sport. So I had the physio, but that were like two people only. And I realized, there's so much more, because it feels like, or it looks like, and many people talk about it, it's just a broken bone. And yes, it is, but it also has an impact on your mental health and your emotional health and your whole social contacts. In my case, the whole recovery journey to walking again was like 11 months back to bushwalking, which is quite long. It's longer than the usual 6 weeks of a broken bone. And so 11 months means you're not part of a community. So that in one night during the recovery, I woke up and thought, what are all the different elements of this? And I literally wrote down, like, there's a lot about yourself, then there are some other people involved, but then there are also other things involved, like even finances and money, because the whole thing costs quite a bit, even in Australia. So you have the different areas and no one is really telling you about that. And there's no one person that's like a navigator helping you to get through it. So I sat down and wrote all the elements down and then looked at it and thought, this is like business. It's the same as a business, because in business, you very often face an adversity or a challenge, and you have to make sure you're okay, but you need a team around you, and you have to deal with difficult stakeholders. And then you have to take really care of the context and all the systems around you and bring all these three things together. So that's actually not very different. When you learn to walk again, it's a onerous process, but then in business, very often it's similar. So that was the learning. And that was about then 2018. And I thought, oh, wow, that was a challenging experience. And then beginning of 2019, I had a viral infection, like an inner ear infection that killed off part of my balance system. And before that, because it's like something it's on autopilot for all the people. When you walk, it's like your eyes, your ears, your body tendons and muscles, and your brain. They all work together and create this system, where they keep you in balance. And the brain tries to make sense of what it hears from the right and left. And if one ear gives a different signal, then the brain is totally confused and is going in overdrive and working very hard. So then that means that the brain is totally exhausted, can't think, can't do anything, and it can't keep you upright for a while. So what you have to do is really retrain the brain circuits to say, it doesn't matter what this ear says or this one, just go with it, trust the rest of the body. And so it's like a lived example of neuroplasticity, where you really notice much more what's happening around you, how your body is, how you are in connection to the environment. And with my love of nature, in the beginning, I had no way of even going out or connecting to nature because my brain was really self-absorbed. And it's like all the peripheral vision collapsed to very little. And then I had to work very hard to train to open up again and be able to connect to the environment and walk and do everything. And it's a process where everything you learn ever about habits and tiny habits, it's literally like a tiny, tiny exercise every day. You can't push it. You just have to do it every day. And it's very boring. But it's like you create a little path in the brain, and then over time it becomes more like a freeway. So that's really repetition every time. So that taught me in a way a little bit about humility and also gratitude. And also again around that you can only do it when you have the right support systems, the community, family and friends. You have some financial matters so that it doesn't stress you out that you can't work. And so these are the things that we totally forget and undervalue. And then when COVID hit, I thought, okay, it's like over again. So another virus. So viruses have been there all the time. It's like we never really paid attention to it, and the impact on different people is different. So that's a learning for my work in leadership, where quite often by focusing too much on getting something done and fulfilling a task or finishing a project, we totally forget about the other people around us. And because we might be very passionate and really want to get it done quickly, we also don't take care of our bodies. So really not enough self-care.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's repeating itself. It's always like, do you look out for yourself? Do you know who is your support system and team? And then what is happening around you in the context, in the environment? And so there were very different experiences, the broken leg and the virus. I would have thought before that a virus, that's a few weeks. But ultimately, emotionally, it was much more challenging to deal with something that's connected to the brain than something that's connected to the leg. It feels a lot more substantial. And it's also the difference between one thing could be seen, so everyone understood that, and the other one is invisible. And there are lots and lots of people around in business, and especially at the moment, who face invisible challenges. And we, as in leadership or anyway in business, we forget to ask people what's going on for them internally. So, and then the internal world ultimately is projected to the outside world and impacts how effective you can be at work and as a leader. So if you can't really talk about or explain what's happening internally, then it becomes really difficult to be there for your team, for example, or for other people. Because if you're not well, then you have a very short fuse. So your anger might bubble up very quickly in a meeting. And it's not because of the other person, but it is because you weren't feeling well. So it's a little bit, it's a balance, but in a different way, because some people said, oh, there is no balance. I can tell you there's a lot of balance that we all have, but because it's automatic, we don't notice it. So it's absolutely necessary, just that it doesn't have to be there all at the same time.
Yeah, because that's one of those 3 areas that you have in the book. Self is a whole section in there where we talk about, how like you've been saying, how important it is to first, look after yourself so that you can go out and do things, from a more centered place. And just to touch on some of what you've just gone through, I think it's as challenging as those experiences were. I think it must do wonders for your resilience and like your self-confidence and belief that you've gone through these really, really difficult challenges and you've come out the other side and you kind of know that you can do these difficult things. And I think that must be really great as you go into your career and into the coaching and the things that you do. When times get tough, you know that you've done those things before. What do you think about that? Do you reflect on those experiences and kind of use them as fuel almost to power on to what you do today?
I think it has led more often to more curiosity and more compassion. So, for example, if I coach someone and they are really struggling, usually any good coach would not have any judgment, but it goes beyond that. It's more that you really are much more aware that everyone does the best they can at that moment in time with the resources that they have. So that everyone does the best they can. But if, for example, they just haven't got the resources at the moment in time, they might show really weird behavior. And instead of then sort of reacting to that, it's much better to sort of explore and ask and face it with a bit of curiosity, saying what might be causing this for this person? What's going on for them? And how can I create an experience for them and hold a safe space so that they can discover a solution for themselves? Because whatever, even, for example, if there's another person facing the similar, let's say the infection or the broken knee, what my healing journey was doesn't mean that another person would have the same healing journey. So that they might have maybe elements of it, but it's not that I have the answer. And that's also a thing that you realize very quickly you don't have the answer. And I have a lot of experience, obviously because of the years I've been doing this, but there might be still moments where I start out a conversation in coaching where I actually don't really know what the problem is, but it doesn't also matter because I only have to be there and hold the space and give the person some questions that help them to figure it out. And so, usually in business, it should be a similar way. And I guess when you, what I remember from came first and started work, you come in with uni and all your other experiences and internships and first work experiences, and you're very much focused on, okay, I'm good in these things. I'm like an expert in these areas and I've learned a lot, and that's all true. But there is a moment in time when you have to shift from being the expert to being more like a coach and a mentor. and an explorer, because ultimately no one will ever have all the answers. But some people never make the shift from letting go of their expertise to a degree, like carrying that as their first impression. It's more important to have that and then build on it with an open mind. Whereas a lot of people feel, oh, and I have this at the moment, I'm coaching some really junior people, and they have this sense, I have to know, I have to have all the answers, and otherwise I won't be accepted. And when we talk a little bit, we find out it's actually not true. You don't have to have the answers. You have to have good questions. That's a very different thing. And like a genuine interest in the area and an honesty to say, okay, I know this, but I don't know that, instead of making it up. But what I'm saying, you also have to be in an environment that supports this type of culture. If, for example, you would have a boss that's constantly putting pressure on you to have all the facts and figures and know like everything like an expert, obviously you respond to that. But it's only good for a while, because it keeps you trapped into this expert mode, which doesn't really serve us at the moment, where everything is uncertain.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on some things there around asking the right questions. There was, you were saying asking the right questions when someone is kind of in that place where you want to help them almost get out of a rut, and, asking the right questions to them so that then they can kind of get out of that rut themselves. And then also this idea where, you don't need to know everything. It's about asking the right questions that'll, help you to, understand the problem better and, work with your team better and things like that. In those situations, I'm just curious generally about this idea of asking better questions, because I think asking better questions is something that is almost tricky, because the right question can, even if it's like this interview, for example, the right question can give you a really interesting answer, whereas like not very good questions can kind of give you just standard answers that don't really give you much information. So asking the right questions, I think, is really, really important. Perhaps in these examples of asking better questions, is there any? Can you think of any situations maybe where someone has gone about asking good questions in the right way, or perhaps like the right question has unlocked something that's been really almost like a breakthrough moment, or things like that? Is there anything that comes to mind?
The thing with right questions, because the word right or good is already like a judgment, where sometimes you ask one question in a certain moment in time to one person and nothing happens. And then there's a little bit a different point in time, and you ask the same question to the same person and they have their epiphany, aha moment, and suddenly they are like ready for it, ready for change. So it's a little bit like a trial and error to find this moment in time when a question also might be appropriate. And then sometimes just sort of look out for the response, like how the person is reacting to it verbally, but also body language and all of that. And then obviously the content of the answer. And so quite often, as a general rule of thumb, it is better to ask questions that are open-ended, like with an open answer, and not yes, no, because yes, no is very much closing down. So whatever you can do, ask a question that opens up a space where you explore more, and then you come to a point where you discover a few options, and then you have to come to the point where you close it back again. And at that closing back, it might be a yes and no answer, like, do I want option A or option B? But before it might be, I have like 30 different options. So what can help someone to open up their perspective, and suddenly before maybe they were looking just in that direction, and then you ask a question, what's there on the other side? And they look there and say, there's another 10 options. So it's a little bit like, how do you move people actually to look around, figuratively speaking, and then once they explore, what can they discover? And then the type of question that I usually is good is when it comes with the right intention that you want to create something for them, like an experience, where they suddenly notice, okay, this is important for them, instead of you wanting an explanation of it. So it's like the answer they're giving, is it more about for your service or is it more in their service? And then if it's serving them or it's serving, like in your podcast, if it's serving the audience, then it's a great question.
Yeah.
And sometimes the other thing at the moment that I'm saying more or less to everyone is we really have to remember to be kind to ourselves and kind to all the people around us. So we will always get it wrong, all of us. At some point in time, there will be something that we stuff up. And then to accept it and move on and be just kind when it happens to someone else. So it's like, then a good question would be, okay, why, or what caused, not why, but what caused this stuff up? What could we both learn from it? And then that might actually then elevate the relationship to another level, because the other person suddenly feels heard and understood and acknowledged, because you are together exploring, okay, what caused this whole, whatever it was, conflict or something. Could be very useful in a project environment, for example. So questions are an art and a science.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. I'd love to, talk a bit, we've touched on it a bit, but, about your coaching and things like that. And a lot of that is focused around leadership and, ways that we can lead better. I want to ask, is there any leadership advice that you think is bad leadership advice? Is there anything that you would say leaders should not do this thing?
Ignore the context. So in the context and things happening. So for example, usually you would hear people would say a leader should not tell, but ask. So because the telling is quite the hierarchical, what we had and what's still prevalent in the military, in conflict. And it is there for a good reason and in certain situations, but it's not very useful in other situations. So, and we quite easily forget when we judge the type of leadership, in what context did it happen. So some people, there are different names for it. Some people call it situational leadership or adapting leadership. But the main point to remember is it never happens in a vacuum. So there is always something around it, or it was before time-wise, or most likely it has a repercussion on the future. So whatever is around it. And if someone sort of, in terms of leadership development, only focuses on like the here and now and only the person and maybe their team without really thinking about everything around it, it's most likely not very effective. So I would say it's a waste of training dollars in a way, because you're not really connecting it back to the real world where it should be applied in a certain context.
Yeah, sure. I think that's important. It's almost like often as a new person in an organization, things that I've heard is, connecting what you're doing to, why the organization wants you to do that, or like where does what you're doing fit in within the wider, the wider group. Yeah, I think that's important too. I guess it's the same thing. If you're leading a team, like how does your team fit into the jigsaw of the organization.
Yes.
And not really forgetting that and treating it like it's something that's in a vacuum, like you said, by itself.
So sometimes it gets the label of that people working in silo. So you have one silo in an organization, another silo. If it's a larger organization, if it's a smaller one, it can be more conflicts between different other teams or different people. So whatever sort of separates instead of connects everything to everything, I think is a bit tricky. It has its place when you have an absolute emergency and it's time critical, then you might resort to another different leadership style for good reasons. But even today, where quite a lot of people with COVID, everything is stressed, in most cases, it would not justify an emergency leadership style. It's not really delivering a solution, but there are areas where it absolutely has to be. But I guess most of us and the people listening to you, I doubt that they will work in these areas.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's important. Like you said, it's coming back to that kindness you were talking about. Treat everyone with respect and be kind, even if it's in those situations. I think even too, it's important that if you're the leader of the group, that you kind of are the one that kind of absorbs the roughness or the problems that are going on, and then kind of shelters the team from those things, and you still kind of turn it into kindness and treating a team with respect, things like that. Absolutely. One thing I want to touch on as well is through your recovery processes and things like that. You mentioned your first sort of broken leg experience was on a big walk, and through reading your book, it's called Naturally Successful, and I think part of that comes from, the nature and things like that as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is part of it. And I'd love to touch on this because I think it is quite interesting, and it's something that, that connection to nature can sometimes get lost when you're, sitting in the office all day long, or, sitting like working from home all day long, or whatever it is. And I think that connection to nature, is something that's really interesting. So I'd love to speak more about this with you. When did you first start, connecting or finding more about this connection to nature idea?
Yeah. In a more, I always loved biology and geography. So for me, it was always geography was around traveling and discovering different landscapes in different countries and different people, how they respond to it. And then when I came first time to Australia in 2000, we did a tour in Kakadu National Park with an Aboriginal ranger who explained to us all the sort of the meanings, the stories, the uses of like one type of tree. And I looked at the tree and thought, I've never seen a tree like that, in a way, like with all the connections and all the things around it. So the tree suddenly became a whole new, different meaning. And then that made me curious to explore more in the Indigenous world, like how do they see it? And then later on, I did a lot of like nature meditation retreats where you're on your own for several days in a row outdoors. And what you notice when you're outdoors there and you're in one spot, so you're not moving around, like not bushwalking, but just being in one area, you notice that everything around you suddenly is connected and it's working like a little ecosystem as such, which it is, but you notice that how you fit into it. And you also start to think a lot more about things like, for example, where do you get the water from? Because you have to drink something. Or where does the water actually come from? What do you eat? How was this food grown? What is the oxygen? So you can't really survive without breathing. So where does the oxygen come from? It comes from a tree and then or any other plant. And you give back. So it's like a circular movement again. And you notice that these connections. So that's one more like the visual, physical level. And then when I did some of the work with some of the Indigenous people, walks and being outdoors, they had more of this understanding that all of that is family. So you're not alone because you're with your family relation of some plant or an animal or so, and it's connected to this specific area of land, and it all has its place, it follows its rules and principles, and so all these connection points. And ultimately, underlying truth under all of this, what became very clear to me, and it's not rocket science, is healthy people need a healthy planet. So we can't be healthy, really, and function well and perform well then at work if our body is not well. So at the moment, for example, I think yesterday I saw headlines. I haven't read the article, but I saw headlines that all the microplastic pollution in the air is in the food, is in the water. So obviously then that comes into our bodies. And no one can really say what that's going to do. So there is a connection there. It's just up to a few years ago, we didn't really notice most of like mainstream. And we also didn't talk about it to see it in the front page of a newspaper now, like a mainstream newspaper. It's quite hopeful and encouraging because you say you can't really change something before you're aware of it. So at least now it looks like, I'm hopeful, optimistic, that more and more people become aware. We have the Sustainability Development Goals of the UN. And so if every business would integrate more of that into their normal business strategy, and every person, every leader in every project that you do, at least have a little bit of an element of it, that could create a big shift. So, and it's because without like wild or natural world, there will be no humans. At least
absolutely.
not in the way how we are today. Maybe we are mutant.
No, definitely. And I want to ask too, for someone that's, working in the office 9 to 5, or perhaps, they're at home or wherever they're working, what are some ways that you think they can grow their connection to nature, become healthy, or even, connect to these more sustainability, missions and initiatives and things like that? What are some steps do you think that they could take to get involved?
Yeah, so it will be very different for each person because each of us had very different experiences as a child and also different opportunities from where you live at the moment. Most of our cities are not very conducive to real nature connection. However, sometimes it's enough to find your favorite spot, maybe in a park, where you can sit just like a few minutes every day or even walk through. And instead of listening to your phone or podcast or something during that time, make an effort to be fully immersed in your environment at that point in time. Because anything that you look at or you're listening to that is not from that area, like all this nature sounds, it takes you away to a different space. So to really notice what's happening around you, even in a park. It can be a very small park, to sit down on a lawn and touch the grass and be really there. Even that has a healing effect. There's plenty of research, even if you were living in an apartment building, going to an office, which many people don't do nowadays, but you look out of the window and have a greenery of some sort and landscape, like a natural environment, you're already better off than someone who looks onto the next concrete building or a concrete wall or so. And there's research that they did with, for example, people in the prison where one part of the prison was looking out to the landscape and one part was looking more to the concrete inner part. And the people looking out to the greenery were like 24-25% less often sick than the others.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, and in the simplest version, you could do with a green screensaver on your computer. Even that would.
Wow.
Or
That's
be really, take some things. For example, I have things on my desk here, like this. It's a rock someone gave to me on one of these nature events, and it's from Afghanistan. It's a fantastic color. And so every time I look at it, I sort of go back to where I got this rock as a gift. And that's one of our ways to connect with nature is in memories and thoughts. And another I've got is like little stick. So, and from time to time, I just take these and remember what type of experiences I had when I got them. And so that is helping because it feeds our sort of innate need to connect with nature. There's a term for it, biophilia. The person who created the term sort of just passed away a few weeks or so ago. And biophilia, Richie, only means that humans have a need and being connected with nature. And I think it's sort of, if you could label it like a survival instinct. But that's my word, so it's not scientific that they would label it like this, but that's how it feels to me. Because if you're stuck somewhere, let's say in a hotel room with no window opening, no fresh air, no greenery at all, it can be quite depressing. So mental health will definitely suffer. I think that's what happened in hotel quarantine for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Like quarantine is pretty horrible. I totally agree. And I think that was great advice, even having like a green or like some kind of nature as your, like you've got your background I can see is like you know, nice and green. You know, even things like having plants in your room. I know people, it's a bit of a craze at the moment is, you know, people buy plants and have them in their room. I think that's great because that's kind of bringing that into your room as well.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really important, I think. And that was really interesting. I didn't know that about that prison example that you gave. I think, that's really cool.
It's actually interesting because it came from a book, this, Johan Hari, Lost Connect, where he researches the real causes of depression. And a lot of people in business, actually, senior executives, very depressed and anxious, lots of anxiety levels. And one of the causes he talked about is loss of connection to nature. So it's one among others and more reasons. But the good thing is it's scientifically proven that it's there. And indigenous people knew it anyway, all thousands of years ago. So if we can combine what they knew and what is possible in today's environment and adapt it a bit in a respectful way, then I think we all would be better off.
Yeah, totally right. I think it's really important, and I've seen other research too, even just about getting outside and getting into the sunlight is great as well, because often when you're in the office or whatever, you just like exercise, getting outside, all that kind of stuff all comes along with this in some ways too. So you can combine all this stuff together, like go for a walk through your nearest park or something like that. I think those kinds of things do wonders for all of your health, like your mental, physical, everything.
Yes.
So I think this is so important, and thank you for raising those because I think that's good. And I'll have to read that book. It's been on my reading list for a little while.
Good. Yes.
Cool. Well, I've got 2 more questions for you, and the first one out of these 2 is, who do you think is a good example, or are there any people that you look up to, maybe it's through your network or whatever, or people that you've come across that are good examples for young leaders, and maybe there's certain people that lead well or have good, maybe it's content that to find out more from, or is there anyone that that would be good for young graduates to find out more from?
There are different people that come to mind for different reasons. So I would not have like the one hero. It's more, I admire certain people for different things. So for example, one of the founders of Atlassian, Mike Cannon, because he is using his money to really bring the topic of climate change to the forefront. So in a way, what he does, first of all, from all I know from the outside and what I've read, is Atlassian has really people-focused culture. So I haven't got any internal insights, so I can't confirm it, but that's how it looks. And then what he's doing with his wealth is really based looks based like on his values and does something good for the environment. And because he has got a voice in the media, he can sort of create some influence at system level. So, for example, with the solar battery storage plant in South Australia, where he had the bet with Elon Musk. So I think Elon Musk would not have responded to many people, but on Twitter, but he responded to him because he challenged him. So I think that is a good way. So it's a little bit like the thinking outside of the box, but being true to your values and using your voice wherever you can. And as a young person in business, that can be really that when you see something and it's important for you and your values and you think there is a moral issue, stimulate the conversation with like a few more senior people. I think if you stimulate the conversation like in a respectful and well-informed way, you can have quite a bit of influence on that.
Yeah.
So I would not underestimate it. In terms of so that is sort of the business world. There are other like Paul Hawkins with the Project Drawdown, where they have brought together lots of scientists who found different ways of how to solve all the climate change problems with the existing technology and some other methods, and put it all together in one book. So he, I think, is a good leader. And then there are many, many really interesting people who are very approachable in the whole B Corp environment. So all the smaller companies where people had an idea and were founding based on purpose and their beliefs. And so that I think would be a good place to start if you really want to work in this area and go to the big corporations in Australia and around the world. I think there's so many good leaders and companies and from all different fields. So you're not bound to like one area. And there are also companies like Who Gives a Crap with the toilet paper challenge, who suddenly during COVID became really famous. It was brilliant. The way how they started was really built on passion. And if you look up all the videos from the very beginning, when they had I think, Kickstarter or Indigo campaign, that was really interesting. So I've supported them from the start. And then seen how they've grown, and now the subscription, and you get your box of toilet paper and tissues and paper towels, and they have given already millions for toilets and sanitary buildings. So that's great. So there are many inspiring people.
Yeah, cool. That's great to hear. And I've got one last question for you today, Ingrid, and that is about people starting their career. You know, people starting their career in 2022. Yeah. Is there one piece of advice, or, you know, what advice would you give to young people starting their career in 2022?
In 2022, I feel with you to start your career now. And because what's happening, it could be actually an advantage, but usually starting a career is like a rite of passage point where you would have done certain things before that because of COVID haven't happened. So what might be good to find some area where you really focus on further developing your self-awareness. And that could be in all sorts of ways. It could be with meditation, it could be with journaling, it could be yoga, it could be just conversations with other people, so that you become more and more aware of who you are and what you want. Because the biggest thing will be in 2022 and most likely next year as well, that you come in and everything is so uncertain and complex. So it's very challenging to say, this is actually my vision or longer term thing. It might be enough to say, I would like to learn these 5 things in the next year. and these are my passions and this is my purpose. So do I bring this together and find the right organization to work in this area? And then during the year, take it step by step and sort of check in. Is it still what you wanted to do? Or is it that suddenly other people have pushed you into something where actually in the beginning you didn't see it coming, but then over time it sneaked in. And so you lose a little bit yourself. And so it's good to sort of while you're learning about yourself, to put in like regular checkpoints, let's say every month or quarter, where you check in, is this really what I want? And what's the next step for it? And then take it maybe in shorter bursts. There are some people most likely finishing now have a long-term vision and goal, and that's great. As long as they can hold it loosely and say, I might not get there in a straight line, but I might take many detours. But I still hold it there like a beacon, like a lighthouse that I can sort of follow. But I might not go straight. I might go and do some detours. And maybe while you're on a detour, you notice, actually, this is much better. And then that's where the check-in point comes in, where you notice, actually, now I know enough about myself. I have the courage to say, no, I'm actually changing my goal. And that's fine. So that's how I would approach it. These like long-term visions and goals, they're good, but only if you hold them quite lightly.
Yeah.
Having
I
said
think
that, you
that's
will
cool.
find a few people who do that and they're brilliant. But for the majority, I think it serves them better and their emotional and mental health if they said, it's okay to change and not know. It's okay to really not know, and then take a break, explore what's around you, decide something, try it like an experiment, and then learn something from it and to the next step. And that's okay. It's you don't have to know everything. Impossible.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and I liked that thing you mentioned about having those check-ins with yourself every so often to reflect on where you are and where you've been and where you want to go, and just checking if the direction you're heading in is still somewhere that you want to go, and really taking the time to consider that, because I think it's easy just to kind of flow down one path and never really consider or stop to think about the alternatives that you could be, the alternative things that you could be pursuing. So I think, that's a really great point. Absolutely.
Yes. And one last thing I really recommend. So Joanne Hari has written another book called Stolen Focus. And I think every person should read it, especially people starting. And younger people use social media and use a lot, because it sort of is contradicting what we just talked about, because in a way he's writing about how, like, for example, big media companies, Facebook and the like, are stealing your attention by manipulating and tracking what you're going to do. And that you can counter that only so far with willpower, but there has to be something else around it. And the first step to change is always just to be aware of it. Nothing wrong with them as such. Well, don't say that social media is bad. It's more to be aware that sometimes you might be slowly steered into a direction without noticing that someone is manipulating you. And then when you're aware what you really want, and you can block out for a while what's happening around you, most likely you're better off and more happy and healthy for a longer period of time. I think the book is really good.
Because I know it came out only recently as well. So it's on my to read list, and so I'm excited to get to it soon. Because I know I've been thinking about reading it for a while. I know he's been hyping it for a while, so I'm excited to get my hands on it. But thanks so much for our chat today, Ingrid. I think it was really fascinating hearing your story, about your recoveries and, about this idea of connecting with nature. I think it's really fundamental in today's day and age. So thanks so much for coming on the show today. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Graduate Theory. If you're interested in getting my takeaways from this podcast, please click the link in the description and go to graduatetheory.com, subscribe to the newsletter, and you can see my top 3 takeaways from this episode. If you're really interested, please click subscribe wherever you may be listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to seeing you next week.